can call me Joker. And as you can see, I'm a lot happier.
Today is no laughing matter, as we'll be taking a look back at Batman 89's Joker. Now, this role was so fondly remembered that there was some backlash and public outcries when Heath Ledger was later cast in the role. And this guy's only crime was that he wasn't this clown prince of crime. There was some real Harry Potter energy here with Batman fans.
How dare you stand where he stood?
People were pissed just because someone else dared to do what Jack Nicholson had already done. And for reference, Batman was recast in his first 4 films 3 times. That's 3 different Batmen in one connected continuity. And people just rolled their eyes and accepted that. But the Joker was recast in the role for a separate story, and everyone started losing their mind. That should tell you just how beloved this big bad truly was. Often Burton and Keaton are credited with redefining the Batman character, but what is equally impressive is Nicholson's time as the Clown Prince of Crime. He brought the same dark edge to the character of the Joker that Michael Keaton brought to the role in Batman, and in that sense they were the perfect match. In terms of the performance itself, I think I may have been a little bit harsh on this iteration in the past. While I still think a lot of my criticisms are valid, I also think that I didn't do nearly enough to reiterate all the good there was to this version of the character. First and foremost, this is one of the most inspired choices in casting ever made. Jack Nicholson aesthetically embodies the Joker. Both the actor and the character are made famous for their signature smiles and, at times, receding hairlines. There was always a similarity between the comic book villain and the award-winning actor, so a marriage between the two just seems natural. And he didn't just match the character's appearance. Jack Nicholson matched the character's appearance and energy. When asked to step in the role, Nicholson rose to the occasion. There's a certain credibility and believability that Jack brings to this role. As odd and outlandish as the character is, he never once comes off as anything but sincere, and sincerely insane. I believe this man is actually the Joker, and I believe this Joker could be an actual man. This version of the Joker was fun. He was funny, which is something I can't say for every portrayal of the Joker that I've seen. Not every cinematic criminal clown has been a comedian. As a matter of fact, most of them weren't. But it's hard to not at least snicker at his sinister, sarcastic nature. Jack just has such a natural charm to him that he makes you almost want to root for him, even though you know that you probably shouldn't. This Joker's a bad guy who does bad things and has a good time doing so. He lived up to his name. There certainly was an emphasis put on the Joker's jokes. He did what he did for yucks, and his body count was a punchline. In many ways, this was the Joker. He's sharp and quick-witted, and he has a joke for any situation or scenario. Jack Nicholson excelled in the simplest, but also some of the most integral parts of the character. Jack Nicholson's Joker was a true showman, knowing how and when to make an entrance, and making anything that he was involved in feel like some grandiose event. He truly was a larger-than-life personality. The man knew how to have a good time, but his good time also almost always came at the expense of everyone else's. The character is also portrayed as being fairly intelligent, at a time when the general public was used to a much more goofy goon. You weren't gonna get that here, though. This Joker knew how to put a plan in place, and when to sit back and watch it play out. I just wish we would have got to delve a little bit deeper into the darker psychosis of the character. It's even more upsetting to me because this is definitely something that Jack Nicholson could have pulled off. Look at his previous performances as Mad Men. Take The Shining, or even One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest at times. I just wish we got to delve a little bit deeper into the darker psychology of the character. Compared to the depths and darkness this character's gone through on screen since, it can feel a little bit, well, unfortunately underwhelming. But to be fair, when you're looking back on the time period and what people were used to, this was a surprisingly dark take on the man who laughs. In that right, Jack was a trendsetter. And any way that you slice and dice this particular performance paved the way for all the Jokers that followed. This was a huge step forward in the character's public profile. Without Jack Nicholson legitimizing the laughing man, who knows where the character would be?
I'm the Joker, baby!
Jack deserves all the credit in the world for breathing life into this maniacal madman in a way that hadn't been done before at this point in time. The more time goes on, the more I appreciate this particular variant of the villain. because it seems like just about every act after him has gone a different route in trying to justify the Joker's name and look. At the very least, this one just presented itself unashamedly. On the other hand, the fact that each version is so significantly different from the one that came before it makes each one of these Jokers feel distinct and unique. But I'm not gonna lie, I really do miss the traditional pale white face and ruby red lips. I truly hope I get to see this version of the Joker again on the big screen before I pass. But at this rate, it ain't looking good. I think Jack Nicholson put on not just a good performance, but a pretty great one in its own right. But I think it's the movie's depiction of the character's motives and motivations that really felt far off for me. There are definitely elements to this rendition of the character that I'm none too fond of. Making the Joker a ladies' man is, well, forgive the pun, laughable. Showcasing the Joker as some lovesick puppy / stalker always felt completely off-brand to me. I've always thought the Joker was incapable of showing any sort of love or affection, unless it was fictitious and used as a form of manipulation. I don't think people factor into the Joker's plans all that much, unless they're specifically being used as pawns. In a lot of ways, I think something as simple and human as feelings would really just be an enigma to him. Joker doesn't love, and if he does, his love doesn't look like what normal, healthy love looks like. Like, case in point, his relationship with Batman. That legitimately may be the one person he loves, and it is to the misfortune of everyone around them. I just can't see this face-painted foe falling head over heels for a pretty face. It feels really silly, even for the Joker. Actually, especially for the Joker. And Vicky Vale is a main motivator for him. He spends a good chunk of the runtime aggressively pursuing Bruce Wayne's Tinder date. I mean, like, all of that's weird to say, but it's even weirder to see. Add to it that this is an essential establishing factor in the Batman-Joker feud, and honestly, the whole thing just becomes mind-boggling.
A woman! Must be insane.
Their rivalry in part revolves around a love triangle. Joker's mad at Batman because he wants his girl. That's what it comes down to in the end. Somehow, I don't think that's nearly as compelling as a madman obsessed with trying to get Gotham's stern, stoic protector to break. There are also much bigger underlining issues here to justify Batman's vendetta with the Joker. It's not Joe Chill, it's the Joker who took the lives of Bruce Wayne's parents. While that's always a factor in this story, a lot of the time it becomes secondary to this three's a crowd story, and that absolutely gets a thumbs down for me. I have mixed feelings on the Joker's origin. On one hand, I'm not too crazy about the Joker not being too crazy. I don't love that this movie made him a mob boss. I've always thought that organized crime feels a little bit too, organized for the Joker. I can't by any means think of him following orders even if it's in his origin. I also don't see him running the mob. It feels too civilized for a clown. Even gangsters carry far too much honor for a psychopath. He's far too mental and unruly for this sort of orderly, disorderly conduct. I don't know, I've always thought the Joker is much more of a could-be cult leader. When I think of the Clown Prince of Crime, I think of a man who acts on his own accord. He isn't following someone else's rulebook, he's writing his own as he goes along, and then proceeding to break the rules that he's just previously established, because that's his thing. I don't like the major changes made to the character's mythos. When it comes to making him the murderer of the Waynes, you could say I'm of two minds on the subject. I think the notion of the Joker being so much older than Bruce kind of makes it feel like a little bit of a mismatch. Sure, age-wise, this Bruce wasn't in his prime, but this Joker was about to become a senior citizen. The gap between the two always threw me off, but I think I've always accepted a lot of it just because of how great the two performers are in their respective roles. I think the story of a nobody being the one to take the lives of Bruce Wayne's parents, to me, it just feels much stronger. Because what people seem to misunderstand is that Joker isn't Batman's archenemy. Batman is definitely the Joker's archenemy. But when it comes to Batman, the Joker's not really his archnemesis. Crime is. Joker does what he does to get one over on Batman. But Batman doesn't take part in his delusions. Batman's archenemy isn't a person, it's injustice in general. He fights for an unattainable goal. What better way to start that story off than by not giving his murderer a face? Batman doesn't pursue the Joker, Batman pursues justice. I think this also presents a problem when the movie ends with Batman killing the Joker, because at this point, he's avenged his parents. His quest for vengeance is complete. It almost feels like his story is over, because the passion of his pursuit is now gone. It's a change that I don't like in practice as an adaptation, but if I was looking at this as its own unique story, I can't deny that that presents a really interesting narrative. It's a real chicken or the egg scenario. This Joker essentially unknowingly created Batman, and then Batman accidentally created the Joker years later. It almost sounds paradoxical, but it's completely accurate. It's like the Ouroboros of origin stories. These two characters are forever intertwined, integral pieces in the other's storied history. There's something beautifully poetic about it all. And even taking it a step further, Jack was there for Batman's birth, and Batman was there for Joker's death. I don't know, man, that's kind of amazing. If I was judging this as its own story without the premise of this being a Batman story, I would love it. To some extent, I love it here too. I just hate that it's these characters that are in that story. I don't think this works for Joker, and I don't think this works for Batman. However, I think this works for Tim Burton, and he should be commended for doing an incredible job. Batman and the Joker were perfect counterparts. The few scenes they share together, they come across as polar opposites. Joker's obnoxious comedic styles clash with Batman's stern and silent nature, as it should. Each actor properly represented the character they were portraying. That was evident not only with each performance individually, but also with the shared chemistry between the two. I actually happen to think this is one of the best Batman and Joker dynamics ever put to screen. Unfortunately, they don't share the screen nearly as much as they should, but that also makes every time that they do feel that much more important and impactful. It makes the moments they share together feel more special. To us, the audience, not to them. But it still would have been nice to have these two get a little bit more acquainted. I think it would be a little bit hypocritical to say that this movie isn't true to the Joker's origins, when the Joker's origins were one of the less explored aspects of the character originally. The fact that it even gave the Joker a solidified story is a deviation in of itself. Not that backstories for this big bad didn't already exist, it's just not something that was really explored. Because quite frankly, most people don't really care who he was before he put on the clown shoes. They don't care about the man, they want to see the menace. However, there are definite elements here taken from the Red Hood story. Batman stopping the would-be criminal and knocking him into a vat of chemicals that forever scar his face and alter his appearance is straight out of Detective Comics. But I think his story feels much more like an adaptation of Black Mask's backstory. Black Mask was a striped-collared criminal who started off as a hired hand, but connived his way into becoming Gotham's greatest crime lord. He had a love interest by the name of Circe, whose face he horrifically scarred. Despite this, she remained fiercely loyal to him, becoming a passive accomplice in his every plan, purely out of fear of what would happen to her otherwise. That is almost verbatim what happens here, with Alicia taking over the Circe role. Outside of the similarity, the rest of the character's background was specifically for the film. The name Jack Napier was made up for the movie, because the Joker has no real secret identity. He's just the Joker. This actually had some staying power though, as Jack Napier has since become an alias Joker uses when going incognito, or alternatively, as a legitimate birth name in other continuities. As with anything Tim Burton related that has an already established lore, the source material kinda goes out the window in favor of him telling his own story with different elements of the mythos. Jack Nicholson was a great Joker. I think as the Joker, the character worked a lot. And whenever the character didn't work as an accurate adaptation of the Joker, it worked in favor of the story that Tim Burton was trying to tell. He may have not always fit the character from the comics, but he did always work as the character in this movie. He's a fitting fixture of the film. The flaws I found within the character were no fault of the actor who was portraying him, but rather how the scripts had portrayed him. While I don't think Jack Nicholson was the perfect Joker, I do think he was the perfect Joker for Michael Keaton's Batman. And honestly, maybe that's more important.
My name is not Oswald! It's Penguin! I am not a human being! I am an animal! Cold-blooded!
My whole life, I've been a bit of a source material snob. I don't mind changes being made to characters. Actually, to tell you the truth, I know that whenever adapting a character across media, changes are an inevitable necessity. Mainly because there are some things that work in practice in one art form, but don't succeed translated into another. Even when it comes to comic book movies, there's some things that should just probably stay on comic book panels. No matter what gets changed though, whatever gets altered to better suit the product, what I think should stay the same is the spirit of the source. Now let me explain what I mean by that. What I'm saying is that the characters, no matter how much they're changed, no matter what differences there are in depictions, they should ultimately still feel like the same character, with just some added tweaks to better fit the narrative of the story. And I'm willing to die on this hill. I stand by that statement, for the most part. There are definitely exceptions to almost every rule, and today I'm here to talk to you about that very exception. The truth is, Tim Burton's Penguin didn't resemble the character from the comic books at all. Outside of name, moniker, height, and weight, this really wasn't the same Oswald Cobblepot. Everything else about the character is custom made for this particular story. Oh sure, he still had the same style. He's decked out in a top hat and a ruffled shirt, constantly carrying an umbrella that he refuses to use, and on a rare occasion, even wears his monocle. Outside of his wardrobe though, this villain has next to no similarities with his namesake, being born with a rare deformity that gives him flippers instead of fingers, teeth that more closely resembled shaved down tiny fangs, blood that runs like sludge, and a haircut of Hulk Hogan. He's not someone who's hard to pick out of a lineup, and believe you me, he belongs in a lineup. Danny DeVito's Penguin was gruesome and grotesque. Hard to look at, hard to listen to, and I imagine probably hard to put up with the stench as well. I mean, the man has spent the vast majority of his life living in the sewers. Call me crazy, but I don't think the guy would smell like a fresh Arctic newborn. He's like an assault on all your senses at once. This penguin was frightening. He looked a lot less like something you'd expect to see Batman go up against, and more like something you'd see in a B horror movie. Like, look at him, he could totally be a Sawyer. By his own admission, he is much more animal than man, snarling as he speaks, spitting out globs of drool as he enunciates, groaning and moaning as he moves. More than Batman, more than Catwoman, this character felt like an actual animal person. Maybe not his namesake. I don't really look at him and think, oh yeah, penguin. But I also don't look at him and think, a human. This is of course the polar opposite of how he's typically depicted. The characterization of this character couldn't be any more different from his predecessor.
This was nothing like the penguin I had imagined.
Prior to this, the Penguin was always an upper-class privileged pompous snob. A power-hungry madman whose hunger knew no bounds. He was intelligent and articulate. A high-profile man with a taste for the finer things in life, committing these crimes to live a life of luxury. He also didn't have any exaggerated features aside from his fine Roman beak. Danny DeVito's Penguin is certainly not winning any beauty contests, but he's also not winning any inner beauty contests either. The Penguin's personality matches his ghastly appearance. He's oafish, obnoxious, and has no social skills. Now granted, he did grow up in a sewer being raised by a bunch of flightless birds, so that should come as no surprise. There are no redeeming qualities to this individual. As a matter of fact, there are barely any human qualities to this alleged individual. He's a violent, vicious, short man with a short fuse. When he's not shouting and throwing his weight around, he's giving in to temptations of the flesh, or at the very least trying his best to. Hitting on every feminine form in sight, feline or otherwise. Oswald Cobblepot certainly makes his feelings known. As a matter of fact, his flirtations sort of become a main motivator for a while, deviating away from his master plan. Despite his admiration and overt attraction to the opposite sex, he has no love nor capacity for love for humanity. His fellow men are only worthwhile if they play into his plans and go along with his sinister schemes. And should they ever question his intentions or actions? Even Max, Shrek, and Catwoman, the two people he schemed with separately, inevitably end up on the wrong side of one of his temper tantrums. While he demands loyalty, he certainly doesn't give any out. In contrast, however, he is sympathetic toward his pets/parents. The self-professed animal has no empathy for the society that snubbed him, but he's still not completely heartless. He cares about the creatures that took him in and showed him compassion. It's a one-off moment that often gets overlooked in the grand scope of things, but it's kind of nice to know that this miniature monster man does have a heart, even if it is mostly black, like his blood. Outside of his zoo crew, he's awful to all those around him, even his own underlings, playing people as pawns in his plans. He has absolutely no regard for anyone or anything outside of his own agenda. Yet, despite his horrific nature and outright hatred for humanity, he still has a bit of a cult of personality, managing to win over the masses with his sob story. Born and rejected by the rich, sent to live in the undergrounds beneath the upper class, which is what that upper class always thought of him anyway, that he was beneath them. It's the classic tale of riches to rags to riches again. The general public aids him on as he looks to reclaim his birthright, not understanding what that statement truly means. Surprisingly, this psychopath gets political aspirations, persuaded into the position mostly for power and perversion. I understand that this has been a plot for the Penguin in the past, but for this reimagining, I just can't imagine this madman becoming mayor. I can completely understand this already corrupt creature becoming a corrupt official, but it's the public taking such a liking to him so quickly, accepting that a man who was raised in the sewers could be the face of the city. I get that this is Gotham, but even then it still feels like a step, or at the very least a waddle, too far. Maybe the story could have worked better had it had more time devoted to it, but it feels like it all happens too much too soon too fast, which is probably my only complaint about this character, aside from his complete and total comic inaccuracy. But I look past most of that because, yeah, this character isn't anything like the character from the comics, but what they replaced that character with was, in my opinion at least, a lot more entertaining. It's entirely different, but different isn't always awful. Sometimes it's actually kind of awesome. Is this the definitive Penguin? Well, no, probably not. For the sole fact that he deviates too far from the source. This isn't what the character was ever intended to be, but this is probably my own definitive Penguin. I think for me, this is my all-time favorite iteration of the character. While Robin Lord Taylor and Colin Farrell both played the part to different degrees of perfection and brought the character from the comics to life, Danny DeVito brought a completely different energy to the role. He was a completely different experience that was must-see. This version of the villain for a long time being redefined the character completely. What can't go underspoken or overlooked, however, is the impact that this performance had on the villain's history. Batman Returns completely reinvented the wheel with this one, and it informed the character moving forward for quite some time. When Batman the Animated Series was being developed, the studio insisted that this design be reused, despite this look being original to this original take on the character and not at all fitting the sophisticated socialite/social outcast he was depicted as being on that show. And in the animated series The Batman, again, the character's design felt very reminiscent of this particular portrayal. Though this time, unlike in Batman the Animated Series, he also had the oafish attitude to match his appearance. Both versions of the character were very clearly inspired by Danny DeVito's time in the role, so much so that they also have 3 fingers on each hand, like the version of the character from Batman Returns. Even in the Arkham video games, while the character doesn't have his trademark fin fingers, he is still portrayed as an absolute slob with a hunger for raw fish, a character trait that comes directly from this movie. Even the Penguin from the Lego Batman movie was reusing the Lego design for the Batman Returns Penguin. Despite being nothing like the comic book villain, DeVito's Penguin had a long-lasting impact on the long legacy of the Long-Beaked, creating a branching path in the character's creative. Since the creation of this specific Penguin, a lot of other interpretations have taken inspiration from this variant of the villain. I personally believe this is a case of the right person behind the character creatively, and the right person portraying the character physically. Left in anyone else's hands, I can't imagine an actual Penguin Man from the sewers could ever be so captivating. The idea on paper sounds beyond goofy. If you heard this read out to you with no prior knowledge of the performance, you'd probably laugh at the suggestion. It just all sounds too outlandish, even for a Batman story. But it worked. And it worked well. For many people, Danny DeVito will always be the Penguin, and I cannot blame that school of thought. I happen to love DeVito in the part, and it's nice to know that DeVito happened to love his time in the part.
I loved it. I had a great time playing the part.
I love Colin. He's a terrific guy.
Yeah.
My Penguin was better.
Oh.
Okay.
Making it known still to this day that he'd like to see a return to the role. After all these years, he still has a connection to the character, even writing a comic surrounding a romance between Catwoman and Penguin, who suspiciously just so happens to look like the one from Batman Returns. So if you'd be interested in checking out the comic book he wrote about the character he once played, I'd suggest heading on over to this video to check it out. A lot of the time when people think of the villains of Batman Returns, they think of the cat and the penguin. But far too often forgotten is the movie's third antagonist, the Man. This character is a particularly interesting case, as unlike the movie's other big bads, he was an original creation made for this movie specifically. I'm talking of course about twisted business tycoon, Max Shreck, played to perfection by Christopher Walken. He's a cold, careless businessman who puts his legacy before everything else. He's not a full-fledged villain necessarily, but by nature he's absolutely every bit as demented as those he shares a screen with. Though he doesn't wear a mask, at least not one we can visibly see. Max's mask is the performance that he puts on for the public, while in private lying to investors, manipulating others, and even taking lives in order to preserve his own legacy. When we're first introduced to the character, we see the separation of the person and the persona immediately, with the way he's spoken to being far different to how he's spoken of in front of an audience. His persona is adored, but as a person, he's despised. He's thought highly of by his audience, but not by his peers.
We have with us tonight a man who really needs no introduction. He's given so much to our city. Will you welcome, please, Gotham's own Santa Claus, Max Shreck.
I almost made off with our mover and shaker, Max Shreck, but where is that insufferable son of a...
Shrek's a greedy, cruel man, every bit as awful as the company that he keeps. He's not a hideous monster man from the sewers. He's not dressed up in something that looks like it was put together by Edward Scissorhands. He's just a guy in a suit. And yet despite that, he is so eerily unnerving. One thing I've loved about this character is that despite being a businessman, he looks exactly like what he is, a Tim Burton creation. This is not a complaint either. For obvious reasons, he's very much at home here. His bizarre mannerisms and the raw unpredictability of a Christopher Walken performance truly put this character over the top. There's an uncertainty that comes with the character's every action. Take for instance when he smiles directly to Selina's face, playing off his threats as a punchline, only to then, without hesitation, push her to her death, or, in this case, rebirth. He's sought out by the Penguin, who for one reason or another, sees him as the perfect partner in crime. Well, less emphasis on partner and more emphasis on crime. Aware of Max's two-faced cutthroat actions, the Penguin basically blackmails the mogul into bringing him back to his rightful place as one of Gotham's elite, which, when prompted by evidence, Max agrees to. But being the cunning individual that he is, he decides to turn this potential negative into a probable positive. After building up goodwill for the man from the sewers, he tries to push him into office, giving Cobblepot a seat of power to sign off on his own big plan, to depower Gotham City. These two have much more in common than what your eye can detect. They were both born to riches, despite one being discarded to rags. They're both self-centered, untrustworthy madmen who see their underlings as disposable pawns in their schemes. Strangely enough, this strange really ties the movie together, playing a vital role in the origins of Catwoman and the plans of the Penguin. He even comes into conflict with Bruce Wayne on a few occasions, being that the two are opposing billionaire business moguls. There's a clear rivalry between the two, and I appreciate that his issues with Bruce lie separate from a problem with Batman. Shreck doesn't take an issue with both sides of the character. He has a conflict with a competitor, but is otherwise indifferent to the Dark Knight, so long as he doesn't involve himself in his involvements. And when he finds out that the two are one and the same, it doesn't make that much of a difference to him, because anyone snooping around in Shreck's business ordeals is at the very least an attempted casualty. Yet despite his connection to all these characters, nothing really comes of it. The movie's other two villains feel screwed over by their cohort turned foe, trying to take their revenge on him separately of each other to varying degrees of success. But in terms of his own evil master plan, his plotline really just falls by the wayside. His evil plans are never thwarted, they're just never really realized. We know he has the intent to do bad things, but he doesn't have the opportunity to see them through. The movie was allegedly initially made with him seeing that objective through. The last scene was meant to be Batman looking up toward a flashing bat signal in the sky, blinking rapidly along with every other light in Gotham City. But this was changed for a variety of reasons, one of which being that fans didn't seem to understand the implication, which is fair given the fact that this movie was juggling several plot lines, several plans, and several villainous characters. But this was also done because following initial test screenings, there was more of a demand for Catwoman. So instead, it was decided to let fans know that the femme fatale was alive and still kicking. I think one of my favorite aspects of this character has to be his son Chip. Actor Andrew Bryanarski was tasked with playing Max Shreck's son, and in doing so, he spent the runtime doing a goofy as hell Christopher Walken impression. It seems a lot less like a legitimate attempt at sounding like the actual Christopher Walken, and much more like an SNL parody of Christopher Walken. It's so hammy and over the top that comparatively, it makes the actual Christopher Walken seem tame.
You'll have to go through me. Chip. Dad, go! Save yourself! Dad, go!
But I'm not knocking it. I actually unironically love it. I think it's because he gets such a limited amount of screen time that he doesn't get the opportunity to overstay his welcome. He's definitely too goofy and over the top for the film that he's in. His acting kind of feels like it would be better suited for Batman and Robin, actually. But because he's on screen for mere minutes, broken up into seconds between tens of minutes, Chip always gets a chuckle out of me, and is integral to the Max Shreck character. I mean that both on a personal level, as I find him to be a highly entertaining accessory to his more famous father, but also literally, as he provides Max with motivation. In addition to his own greed, Max acts out in an effort to provide the best life imaginable for his son.
This power plant is my legacy. It's what I leave behind for Chip. Nothing must prevent that.
Which is commendable. However, his way of going about it is condemnable. Also, Maximilian, you're worth maximum millions. I think Chip is gonna do just fine. Just make sure you leave him in the will. Max's relationship with Chip really humanizes the character. It is the one time the character is ever shown to, on occasion, be selfless, sacrificing himself by replacing his son as the target of Penguin's revenge. Despite his naturally brutal nature, he isn't without chosen compassion. He may put himself above everybody else, but that courtesy is extended to his bloodline as well, for some of the time. Despite being a one-off character, Shrek still left behind an interesting legacy. There's a lot of strange behind-the-scenes accepted lore that is either just theoretical, or just straight up untrue. A lot of people seem to be under the belief that this character was originally meant to be Harvey Dent, with the character's eventual demise being the birth of Two-Face. Not only is that very untrue, but Harvey being in the role wouldn't have made sense for this story. The little we saw of Harvey in the first film depicted him as honest and noble. So for him to act out in the way that Max Shreck does in this movie wouldn't make sense for the character pre-Two-Face transformation. Keep in mind the split personality being a part of the character's history prior to his scarring originated from Batman the Animated Series, which came out after Batman Returns. Also, Harvey was a district attorney, not a tycoon. So how that story would work without Shrek specifically is really just anyone's guess. Others seem to be under the impression that Max Shreck played a part in Batman the Animated Series, but was renamed to Roland Daggett. While there is some similarity between the two, with both characters shown to be corrupt businessmen, outside of that there's no other comparison to be made. However, Roland Daggett was an original creation to Batman the Animated Series, who ironically enough went on to make his way to the big screen in The Dark Knight Rises. I don't think either of these accepted facts are entirely accurate. You could find no concrete evidence for either. I think in the past I might have even accepted them as fact here on the channel, but after doing some deep research, I got nothing other than hearsay. Just a lot of he said, she said, nobody actually said speculation. The Max Shreck character has never been seen anywhere else, outside of a tie-in depicting the events of the movie, and I think that's a real shame. You'd surely think that this character would go the Harley Quinn route, be made for moving media and then transition back into comics. But as of right now, he's been tragically forgotten and lost to time. Another interesting thing to note is that in some of the first drafts of the script, Max Shreck was written in to be Oswald's younger brother, which I think would have made a little bit more sense. It would have made Penguin's motivations more evident, and given the two more of a reason to interact. That plot is not only taken out of the final cut of the film, but was taken out of the final cuts of the script. And if I'm being honest here, I'm a little let down by that. This Brotherhood of Bad would have added a lot to the final product. It would have been a great commentary on wealth and class, how one born different still might be excluded to keep up appearances. Can you really be upper class when you live beneath them? A difference in upbringing and favoritism. All of these elements could have made for a really interesting watch. To be fair, I don't think the movie is terribly worsened without some of these plot threads. I just feel it could have potentially been bettered with their inclusion. Though there was more than enough going on already in the film, and I can easily see how maybe these additions might have come off as excessive. Regardless, I think both Max and Chip Shreck definitely deserve to be given their due. They're unique additions to the world of Gotham that I'd love to see utilized once again. I don't think it's out of pocket to say that Michelle Pfeiffer is probably one of, if not the most fondly remembered Catwoman of all time. I don't know that any other woman who has ever worn the mask or cracked the whip has been referenced nearly as much since her brief time in the role. Actresses who have taken on the role after her have even credited her performance as a major influence in theirs. We're talking about a character who was so beloved by test audiences that the studio had to go back and film an additional scene confirming that this character survived, just because of the negative reaction that was given to her otherwise untimely demise. And that was done on such short notice that Michelle Pfeiffer wasn't even able to step back in to fill out the catsuit. Like with all pre-established source material that Tim Burton gets his hands on, the character was changed, though not completely. Whereas Danny DeVito's Penguin felt far too removed from the original character's origins, feeling less like a rendition of that rogue and more like a wholly original concept, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is different enough to be distinct, but not so different that she's unidentifiable. There's plenty of common ground between this reimagining of the femme fatale and the ones from comics and TV that preceded this. But there's also a lot of deviation and divergence. They compare just about as much as they contrast. Her origin story here is original, though elements from it would go on to become the backstory of other Catwomen over the years. Being a bit socially awkward, Selina Kyle is a loner, and not one by choice. She's not thought highly of by her peers. Actually, she's usually not thought of at all, and she's incredibly frumpy, by which I mean she wears glasses. Apparently that's all you needed to be unattractive by 90s standards. The few relationships she actually does have with others seem to fail and fall apart before they're even given a chance to prosper. She has absolutely no life to speak of whatsoever outside of her line of work. Since this portrayal, you can copy and paste this exact description and use it for several other big screen villains. This kinda set a precedent in comic book movies. A lot of heroes' rogues galleries share some DNA with this particular performance. Edward Nygma in Batman Forever, Pamela Isley in Batman and Robin, Guy Pearce in Iron Man 3, Jamie Foxx in Amazing Spider-Man 2, Kristen Wiig in Wonder Woman 1984. The list goes on. I definitely haven't covered all of them. Each iteration being more over the top than the last, and each one being worse off for it. This performance created a trope that has really only truly worked effectively once. Maybe twice. But it was never done as well as it was with the first one. This performance has constantly been imitated, but it's never truly been duplicated. A lot of, if not all of the examples given, are not looked back fondly upon. Yet Pfeiffer is still beloved and considered to be by many the greatest Catwoman that has ever been put to screen. Pfeiffer Selina is a good-natured, well-meaning individual who is constantly overlooked by the world around her, and whenever she does receive any sort of attention, it's overwhelmingly negative. Feeling put out by everyone around her, she becomes put off by all those that surround her, losing faith in humanity, but finding a new faith within herself. This isn't exactly the case for other Catwomen. as typically, more often than not, the character is the same with or without the mask. The cowl is really a formality. Catwoman is very rarely vulnerable, let alone this in peril. However, this really only exists to create the contrast between the two halves of this whole person. In terms of the characterization of Selina Kyle, this is a little off-brand. However, in terms of the characterization of Catwoman, this is extremely on-brand. It's amazing how she manages to fit so much personality into such a tight catsuit. She has the right attitude for the part. As Catwoman, instinctual fear has been replaced with absolute confidence in every given situation. Not all too dissimilar from the series' titular character. She comes off as larger than life. Every scene with her almost feels like an event. Like any good Catwoman performance, she's unhinged and unpredictable. You never know if you're seeing her break through her bad nature and reveal her true self, or if it's just another facade, another trick, yet another means of manipulation. And at times, it seems like she doesn't know either. In a way, Selina is sort of stuck in limbo, torn between the person she was and the one that she's become, desperately trying to get back to who she used to be, but finds herself unable to let go of the grudge that made her who she is today, taking on traits to protect herself and take vengeance on her own tormentors. In this sense, that's definitely a deviation in terms of depiction. Traditionally, Catwoman can't be tamed, but this Catwoman seems unable to subdue herself. Selina here is much more reckless than she's ever been before. She's a tortured soul. And while I said that Catwoman seems to have control of any given situation, Selina Kyle doesn't even have control of herself. Her dueling dual identities are constantly in conflict, very rarely meeting in the middle and instead continually clashing. Tim Burton's Catwoman is admittedly a lot darker than a lot of other Catwoman iterations. While Catwoman has always been at the very least a little bit jaded, this Catwoman is downright cynical. It's a much more twisted version of the feline femme fatale. Unlike the original character, she's not doing bad to achieve good. This isn't just a means for an end. She's just bad for the sake of being bad, and it seems that she truly enjoys the bad things she does, taking great pleasure in each nefarious scheme. Both on screen and in panels, Selina Kyle is a complex character with a constantly shifting moral compass. Except in the comics, she does bad things for a good cause. She's either protecting vulnerable women or advocating for animals, acting as the voice of the voiceless. In contrast, this Catwoman is not nearly as much of an anti-hero. As a matter of fact, I would say she's more of a full-fledged villain. She isn't out for justice, she's seeking revenge. Well-deserved revenge, but revenge nonetheless. When she does actually save others, she almost does so begrudgingly, taking her time to further victimize the victim, only taking mercy on the woman to stand up for her in a similar situation where she could not stand up for herself. This dark side isn't just sprung on randomly. Even before her literal fall from disgrace, her dark side is displayed in passing, though it isn't until her eventual death and rebirth that this cynicism floats to the surface and takes center stage, becoming her primary personality trait.
You got kind of a dark side, don't you?
No darker than yours, Bruce.
I wouldn't say that this was a mask that she hides behind. It's an extension of herself. One side of a whole character, and a side that eventually takes over her whole character. She uses an arsenal of tricks to achieve her goals, using seduction as a means of distraction or in an effort to gain accomplices. She's almost like Poison Ivy, just minus the pheromones. She gets the job done on her own, by having other people get the job done for/with her, using her feminine wiles to get what she wants, and at times turning predators into her prey. It's actually kind of a wonder why she looks for the backup that she does, because it's not like she necessarily needs it. She's fully capable of handling herself, clawing and scratching her way out of every scenario, managing to go toe-to-toe with the Dark Knight on a couple of occasions. To say that she could hold her own is a bit of an understatement. Unlike her comic book counterpart, this version of the villain did possess some sort of superpowers, as she's shown to survive various encounters with the Grim Reaper throughout, being shot on 4 occasions and pushed to her death on 3 separate occasions, as well as somehow surviving self-appointed electrocution. This is described as being her 9 lives, which is kind of weird, as A, cats don't actually have 9 lives, and B, most people only have 1. So how she managed to lose about 8 of them in the span of just over 2 hours is beyond me. I don't know, maybe if you have more than 1 life to live, you don't value them quite as much. Her death and rebirth at the paws of strays also gave her cat-like abilities and agility, almost akin to what the spider did for Peter Parker. This Catwoman doesn't feel like a woman in a catsuit, she feels like a legitimate Catwoman. Though sometimes maybe to a fault. Sure, Selina's always had an affinity for cats and acting out in ways that they do, but I don't think that she'd go as far as cleaning herself in front of company. I mean, what's next? You gonna have her cough up a... Alright, we're just gonna move on because I don't care to remember that any further. Despite going too far at times, the role has still benefited from the wildcat antics. Ultimately, Selina Kyle is a good person who's been wronged, with each new betrayal only further burying her in the darkness that created her, with Batman and Bruce being the only glimmer of light in her life. Well, him and her cats, I guess. Bruce gets to know Selina and sees past her wrongdoings, recognizing the similarities the two share.
We're the same. Split. Right down the center.
Michelle Pfeiffer deserves all the praise in the world for her time in the part. A lot was asked of this actress. Not only was she asked to portray a larger-than-life sex symbol, but she was also basically asked to become a badass overnight. We're talking past the point of putting on a good performance here. The suit that she wore was so tight that she actually had to be vacuum sealed in it. All those whip cracks in the movie and a lot of her fight scenes and acrobatics, a lot of that is actually just Michelle Pfeiffer, who had to go through vigorous training in order to successfully do what would now be done by camera cuts, extras, and body doubles, and maybe a splash of CGI for good luck. All her. The bird that was flying out of her mouth in that one scene? Not a special effect. They actually put a live finch in her mouth. It's real. It's all real. You gotta give it to this woman. She was all in. It's no wonder why so many people still today consider Michelle Pfeiffer the definitive Catwoman. Despite whatever differences there were between the character from the script and the character that was drawn on the page, there's a lot more common ground between the two. Michelle Pfeiffer embodied the character. That is why, to me and so many other people, she will always be Catwoman. And if you like this video and would be interested in seeing me cover some of the other Catwoman brought to the big screen, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
"We're safe, Cat Lady."
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.